In this lecture, I just want to sum up Eris's argument, his position on physician-assisted suicide. I also want to say a little bit about what I think are some more general lessons we can learn from Eris's argument beyond the issue of physician-assisted suicide. So what does Eris think we should do? It's important here, I think, to think about the context of the Philosopher's Brief, which is most of what Eris is responding to. This is the thing he has mostly in mind, I think. And the Philosopher's Brief was arguing, well, the Supreme Court should just strike down all the state laws against physician-assisted suicide in the same way that they had previously, in the Roe decision, struck down all the state laws regulating abortion, or at least the ones that regulated it before the third trimester. Eris doesn't think that this is a good idea. The court should not intervene here. That does not mean that he thinks that states individually should not legalize it or take some steps to do it. He thinks that this could be a good thing. We could see how this plays out in the states. But he thinks even the states should be slow and deliberate and very cautious about this. We certainly shouldn't have the Supreme Court just knocking down all these laws from the top, which they didn't. The Supreme Court did not side with the people who wrote the Philosopher's Brief. They left physician-assisted suicide laws in place, the laws that restricted it. Now, it is interesting. Since then, a number of states have legalized it in some form or other. I looked this up. The list is always growing. There seems, it's hard to project with these things, but there does seem to be a trend that more and more states are legalizing it. So at present, California, Colorado, the District of Columbia, Hawaii, Maine, New Jersey, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington all have physician-assisted suicide in some form or other. Now, the laws are going to differ from state to state. I haven't dug, really deeply into it, but, more and more states are legalizing it. Now, I'm not sure if they're going faster or slower than Eris would have liked, but Eris says, well, let's look and see what these effects are. As states slowly start to lift their restrictions, are we getting good data on it? Are there cases where regulations aren't, doing what they're supposed to? Are the people who die clearly not in untreated physical pain or suffering from untreated mental illness? So precisely what we're doing at the moment, slowly loosening restrictions on it, is exactly what I think Eris recommends. Now, I don't know if we're going more quickly or more slowly than he would like. I don't know. But more or less, this is the policy that Eris recommends. Now, there are a few things beyond physician-assisted suicide, a few issues that I think make this Eris piece really interesting, and why I assign it. And one of these is, John just saying, well, I think physician-assisted suicide probably represents a tragic dilemma. And a tragic dilemma is one where there are no good options. You might hear people say, damned if you do, damned if you don't. The idea is neither of your options are good ones. They're both bad in some way. All you can do is choose the least bad option. John thinks physician-assisted suicide is one such tragic dilemma. If we full-on legalize physician-assisted suicide very quickly and tomorrow, well, he's pretty sure there are going to be some people who shouldn't die who will. People with untreated mental illness, people with untreated physical pain, people who death is not the best option and it's not what they really want. If they had their pain treated or their mental illness treated, they would do better. They would, value the time they have left. There's also a good chance as we full on legalize physician assisted suicide, it will further devalue the lives of the sick and the elderly, right? We already don't do so great with this. In the piece, I think in the full piece, John does talk about this. It was kind of edited out, I do believe, in the one I gave you guys. But also this Velleman piece that I didn't have you guys read, he emphasizes this, and I think it's a good thing to be aware of. It is something we should worry about. So if we full on legalize physician assisted suicide, these things are likely. And as states legalize it even cautiously, there's not as much of this going to happen as if we just threw open the floodgates tomorrow. But even with that, I think Eris would say some of this is inevitably going to happen. But on the other side of the coin, if we don't legalize physician-assisted suicide, as long as we keep it restricted, there are going to be people who suffer who would not otherwise suffer. Eris is clear, we have come a long way in the treatment of pain. We are not perfect at it. There are some cases of terminal illnesses where we just cannot manage the pain. These people will suffer. If we don't legalize physician-assisted suicide, if we do, they wouldn't, right? That's the cost we'll pay for not legalizing it. Or these people will be forced into illegal options. Seeing if their doctor will do it for them on the sly, maybe trying to get family members to help them with it. These things can go some pretty horrible places too. There's a really nice Frontline documentary. I used to have classes watch it. I won't have you guys watch it. I don't think it's necessary. Probably doesn't contribute as much as it should to be, an hour. I think it's 2 hours long. But if you guys are interested, this just shows that there are cases where family members get caught having to help out the terminally ill. That is a wrenching situation. That wouldn't happen if we legalized it. On the other hand, people who shouldn't die will die if we do legalize it. So Eris says, look, let's just be honest. I think that's a lot of his beef with the people who wrote the Philosophers' beef. I think he'll say, look, let's just be honest. I think there are no good options here, and I think keeping it illegal for the time being, perhaps with some slow legalization, is the least bad of the two bad options. You guys act like there will be no cost to legalize it, like regulation is going to magically solve everything, that there are not going to be any problems. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he would say something like this. Your position would be better if you just said there's a tragic dilemma, and I disagree with you, Eris. The least bad option to my mind is full-on legalization. To claim that there's a neat option that legalization is clearly the best thing here and there's going to be no cost for legalization, that it will all be good, that regulation will solve all problems, Eris will say is just, it's either dishonest or naive. All right. So 2 general lessons from Eris. One is that I think we should recognize that there are real tragic dilemmas. In moral debates, we don't like to admit this. If we don't like one side, we'll say, well, my side's clearly better. There will be only good things that come from following my side of the debate, clearly in every way better than the other, right? The real world is not like that, I don't think. A lot of decisions are going to be tragic dilemmas, right? Think of something really disconnected here, whether or not to intervene in, say, the Syrian civil war, right? If we don't intervene, al-Assad's going to do terrible, terrible things to innocent people. He's going to stay in power. That's really bad. Let's just admit it. If we do intervene, well, we might very well start World War III with Russia. That's also very, very bad. I would argue even worse, right? But whatever side you take, let's just admit there are no good options. There are just less bad ones. I'm less sure about this. I sometimes suspect that the abortion debate is an issue where there might not be a clearly best option. There might be only choices between two bad options where we have to take the less bad one. I do think the arguments on both sides raise some very serious issues. There's a nice piece on this as far as abortion goes. I didn't give it to you guys. We can't cover everything I'd like to. I think it was by Caitlin Flanagan in The Atlantic. If you guys are interested, look it up. It just does bring out how abortion is in her mind a tragic dilemma. Not quite her words, but I think that's what she's getting at. Worth looking into. I suspect there are a lot of other areas in life where there are tragic dilemmas. And I think we would be better served in our public debates if we were more honest about this. Don't pretend there's a best option where everything is just wonderful in every single case. That will not be true. That will not lead to good, clear-eyed, honest political debates. Finally, and I think this is something that philosophers and political scientists, political theorists, we do our thinking about how the world should be, but I think we should always keep in mind how our principles are going to interact with the way the world is, right? It's not enough that you have good principles you can formulate in a classroom or an article or giving a talk at some university. You really do have to think about how these will play out in the real world. And this is an issue in a few weeks when we get to distributive justice. I think Elizabeth Anderson will say this, especially to libertarians like Nozick, but I think even people on the left like Rawls, she'll say, whoa, your abstract principles, you need to think how they play out in the real world. So I think this is something John really emphasizes. I think it's a good general lesson. That's not to say that abstract principles like we come up with in a philosophy class or a philosophy essay are useless, but you can't just stop with your principles and be lazy and say, okay, it's up to other people to put these principles in place and figure out how they'll work out, right? That's a bit lazy, and it also does not really adequately defend or justify whatever principles you've put down. We'll talk about this a bit more when we get to Rawls and Nozick. This will register.